Today we're going to be learning about how you take care of a bow. One of the first things to be aware of with your bow is this stuff right here, which is horsehair. Now with the hair here, we never actually want to touch it with our hands. And the reason is that our skin has oil on it. And that oil from our skin is going to stick to the hairs, and it's actually going to keep rosin from being able to stick to the hairs. And what ends up happening is if you've got a lot of area where the rosin's not sticking, what you get is as you're playing, you'll be playing and you'll have a dead spot. So try never to touch the hairs of the bow. One exception I usually like to say is sometimes down at the bottom. This is because for me, I've got a really long thumb, and I actually have to push my thumb up against this right here to make this work. Now occasionally some others might have this same thing that they really need to push up on the hairs with their thumb, but other than that we try not to touch the hairs. If you don't have any rosin on your bow, what ends up happening is the hairs won't stick to the string and they won't pull on it. And it's actually the pulling of the strings that causes the sound to happen. So there's different kinds of rosins. I like to use this Rohwer rosin. And what you do to rosin up your bow is, first of all, you tighten it up. Make sure it's as tight as you would use it for playing. And then we're going to take and run the hairs on the rosin. Now, if you want to get the rosin on just a little bit quicker, what you do is you push just a little bit harder and go just a little slower. This creates extra friction that gets the rosin on just a little bit quicker. And rosin is something you should do for about every hour of playing that you do. Or if you notice that it's just kind of sliding around a little bit, not quite sticking to the string, it might be a good time to double check your rosin. A good trick that I like to do to check on the rosin is we take our thumbnail and remember not to touch the hairs with your hands, and we go like that and we see about how much rosin is on there. I'm seeing a nice white streak. If you don't see any rosin, that means you definitely need rosin. If you see, first off, if you see a lot of rosin when you do that, then it means you might have too much. Especially if you start to see rosin cloud as you're playing, a lot of rosin. Now, it's better to have too much than too little, but it's also, it means you're going to have to clean your instrument up a little bit extra with that rosin on there, and it'll make a grittier sound too. So try not to put too much rosin, but make sure that you are rosining up on a regular basis, again, every hour of playing or so. Now, a really important thing too with this is the hairs. They need to be tight when you play. Now, if they're not tight, it's kind of like a ski that's made out of a floppy wood. And if you're trying to go down a hill with this floppy wood, then what happens is that it doesn't have the control that you need from it, and it's really miserable to do that. And that's the same thing if we've got our hairs too loose, is we don't have the control that we need. And sometimes you'll get a buzzing too where the hair is bending enough that you're touching the stick onto the string, and you get kind of a buzzing sound from that. The other thing though is we don't want this too tight. So the general rule is that we take our pinky, and if you can almost but not quite stick it through where it's the skinniest, then you should have about enough tightness on there. Sometimes I like my bow a little bit tighter, like if I'm using this bow on a violin, it's actually a Viola bow, and because of that I'll loosen it just a little bit so I have a little extra grip on those different strings. But on my Viola I'll tighten it up just a little bit more. So the tightness kind of varies. If you feel like you don't have enough grip on the string, then tighten it just a little bit. If you feel like it's a little bit too heavy on the strings, a little bit too kind of bouncy, you might loosen it a little bit to create less tension in the hairs. Now the way we tighten this is with this screw right here, and if we go clockwise looking straight at it, then that's going to tighten it. So I'm going to turn it this way, and that tightens it. If I want to loosen it, I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go counterclockwise. I'm looking straight at that. If you look now, I've got my hairs and the stick a little bit closer together. That means that there's a little less tension on this. Now, what I don't like to see is this right here when we put it away in the case. And the reason for me not liking this is it's very easy for these hairs to get caught when they don't have any tension on them whatsoever. And so I like to tighten this just barely enough that there's a tiny bit of tension, so that they're less likely to catch and less likely to tear and rip. And we actually do want to loosen this when we put it away because the hairs are very elastic. They end up stretching. And if they stretch long enough, what happens is you can't tighten this anymore because the hairs have gotten too stretched out. Sometimes, too, the hairs get weaker and they start to break. And that's about most of what we need to talk about today. One final thing with this is your tip is pretty fragile right here, and so you want to take extra good care of your tip. Don't lean on this bow, and just generally don't sword fight. Don't do any inappropriate things with it. Use it for what it's intended for, and if you're not using it, set it down somewhere safe, like on a stand, that you know nobody's going to step on it or other things to it.